couple of weeks ago, we aired a rabbit hole episode on aesthetics and med spas. And today, we're going to hear from a CRNA who's blazing her own path in the injectables business. Let's get to it. Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and my guest today is a CRNA whose Plan B has now become her Plan A. Mary Smiley Ford has been a CRNA for the last 6.5 years, and about a year and a half ago, she took a leap of faith. Along with her twin sister, Mary started a med spa company named Smiley Aesthetics. And since February of last year, their business has grown now to 5 med spas with over 100 mobile injectors in 9 states. Now, aesthetics is her main focus, and anesthesia has now become her side gig of just 1 to 2 days per month. So without further ado, I want to welcome you to the show today, Mary.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having me, Bobby.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get into it. And as I typically do, I want to start at the beginning here. So how did you first become interested in aesthetics?
Yeah, so when I was getting ready to have my first son, I actually have a little bit of a recovery story in my background. And so, yeah, and that in the end of 2018, that became part of my story. And I was going to take a break from anesthesia for having children as well as kind of in conjunction with that. So in the meantime, I did get pregnant. And while I was pregnant, I went to start working at a med spa as just an alternative, as like another skill to pick up. Because as you know, as a provider, we're not taught anything about Botox and filler in school. And so it is a whole nother skill set. So I went and got trained, and I reached out to a bunch of med spas and found one to begin injecting in. And I started working there full time as their injector. So that was the start of my aesthetics career.
Okay. So I guess in that sense, like you kind of just jumped into it. You didn't have a whole lot of startup costs right then.
Right. So very different than starting Smiley Aesthetics, going very similar to kind of a hospital job. Going in, they already had a client base. They did their own marketing, their own stuff. And I was just there as the provider of, the injectables that require a medical license. So very different, yes, than starting up the med spa and stuff, which happened, as you said, in February of last year.
Yeah. So how long did you do that before starting Smiley Aesthetics?
I was full-time with it for like 11 months. And then I went back to anesthesia and I continued injecting for them kind of PRN. Okay. So I did it with that med spa in Tennessee for about 2 years, and then took a little break, was doing anesthesia full-time, had another child. And then the idea of Smiley Aesthetics was born and implemented 4 weeks after I had my second son. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy. So, well, I guess the next question then, just keeping on that idea of cost, what did it cost you to actually get this thing up and running? I mean, you've got education, you've got the products, you've got everything. So how much did that run you?
Well, it depends on how you approach it. Really, there's 2 ways. If you do start up as a mobile injector without the overhead of a space and building out a space, that can be very much more cost effective than opening up a med spa to start out, or opening up a space that you have to furnish for obvious reasons. So, training is required in every state. There are different levels of training required in each state, but legally it is required. So, my training cost me somewhere $1,600 is kind of a lower end, really. You can get up to some quite a bit more expensive trainings. There are some good quality trainings at that price point, especially for basic stuff. And then, getting you have to have a medical director in most states, aside from our full practice states. You can be your own medical director. So that can be an added cost, which it was for me. And then the product itself, you're just connecting with the manufacturer. So for cosmetic injectables, it's illegal to outsource them, just like with most medications in the United States, if not all. No importing at all. So you got to get it from the USA or from the manufacturer direct. And so that's kind of where you source your product, or where I source my product. And beyond that, other than alcohol swabs, needles, and some supplies, that's enough to get going mobily. Some way to chart would be another thing to think of, but paper charting can be free. And then I did utilize an EMR system. So those are kind of the basics to get going mobily anyway.
Okay. So you do have an EMR. That's interesting. So how did you figure out which one you wanted to use, and how did that process go?
So I used the one that I became familiar with in the med spa, which did happen to be one of the most popular, probably the largest one in the nation. We are still with them now. We did look to switch a few times, but ultimately stuck with them, and glad we did. So yeah, it was just a matter of familiarity, but there are quite a few out there, and it's, you know how EMRs are, just like in aesthetics. Everyone has its negatives, and you just got to pick one and probably ideally just stick with it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now we didn't really touch on it, but you went into this business with your twin sister. How's that been working together on an actual business as a side to just being sisters?
Right. So let me back up a little bit and say, so I guess the idea starting Smiley Aesthetics was different than my start of my aesthetics career, as I've kind of explained, going into med school as an employee versus starting a business. A 1099 business is what we started. And so that happened in the fall of 2021. And when I have a friend who's my medical director, and just the idea, and then I brought her along because she is my twin. And we just do a lot together. We get that question so often about working together as family members. And I think there is something to be said, not something, probably 99% of it to be said, of the identical twin piece. It's very different for us. It's not even the same as one of my other sisters who I'm extremely close to. There's not anything I can ever picture coming, between us. And we've had the drug out fights. I think that other business partners experience that would end them. And, we've had them, but it's just 20 seconds later. It's like, so, are you coming over tonight with the kids? It's just a different relationship. So it's hard I like to point that out, because I know I stand by it, not that recommended to work with family, but it has worked out very well for us. But I think noting that difference to entrepreneurs and to business people is important, because that's why it works so well, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Both of my grandfathers had quote unquote family businesses. My grandfather on my mom's side worked with his brother in property development, and my grandfather on my dad's side started a subpoena service business, and pretty much all of our family has worked for that company at some point in our lives. I spent summers working there during college. So, I've seen some of the family dynamics, and sometimes they work really well, and sometimes they can be kind of edgy. So it's an interesting thing. But of course, like you said, having the identical twin piece of it, that's a very different thing that most of us are not going to experience. So
yes, it definitely has something to do with it. We have incorporated other family members too. I love that you've done that in ways that make sense, for sure, in ways that make sense. And that's also gone very well. So, I think it's family specific probably. But I think us owning the business together like this is a little specific to the twin thing, for sure.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, now you've had a tremendous amount of growth in just a year and a half. So can you walk me through that process of how you happened to scale this business so quickly?
Sure. So it started out with my sister and I in February. One of my best friends, aside from my sister, is an attorney, and the type of law she practiced and stuff like that, it made sense very quickly once I reached out to her. We started talking about scaling the business and compliance in medicine, but in med spa and medical aesthetics, it's so challenging to find out. It's so challenging to understand. A lot of people say it's gray, and it's really not gray. It's pretty black and white. It's just a matter of, there's 3 levels, there's finding the law and then backtracking the law, then going up to the FDA. It's just challenging. So bringing on an attorney was not something we thought of as a partner initially, but very quickly we did that. And I speak to that because it's a huge part of how we scaled so quickly, and then compliantly, because, that's the biggest thing ever is our licenses are on the line just as much as if we were in the hospital. And I think realizing that's very important and that people don't realize that as much as they should. So we brought her on as a partner. She is our third partner. And we have just been able to, utilize her to make sure that whatever state laws and whatever we're doing, we can more quickly figure it out because, no shade on lawyers, but, an email can be a week, it can be 2 weeks, but having a partner that, is working for us and also with the same goals and a vested interest has been, just very, what's the word I'm looking for? Instrumental in, yes, and us scaling, because legal is such a big blockade. So that's the biggest thing that's helped us scale, I think. And then, I think a CRNA, just the drive, there's a part of it that's just ideas and entrepreneurial mind and, and just working hard. There's definitely a level of doing that for sure. But
I'm consistently amazed by CRNAs and some of the entrepreneurial tendencies that seem to be pretty prevalent in a lot of us. And so that's something that, I think programs are embracing a little bit more of the business side of things, and they're trying to teach some of that stuff now. But it's been an amazing process getting to know so many people who are doing so many different things. So, definitely kudos to you guys. Now, you mentioned that, you've got over 100 mobile injectors that are working with your company. So how does that work exactly? Is there like a payment process or, how are you guys supporting these injectors so that they want to come and work with you as opposed to like, say, just, hey, I'm going to go do my own thing, because I see all these other people doing that. So how does that work?
Gosh, I could speak to it for hours probably. What we've come up with is there's a bit of proprietary portions to it, which obviously I wouldn't necessarily speak so much to in detail, but it's more, I think from a general level, it's bringing down these barriers of, for example, finding a medical director. That alone, it's for a CRNA, it's not as big of a deal, right? We speak to physicians and surgeons and anesthesiologists and stuff all the time. So we have friends and people that we would ask tomorrow to maybe be our medical director for something, but it's not the same for nurse practitioners. It's not really the same for PAs and RNs, and especially RNs. So offering that part of it, it's almost a medical director service. It's more than that, but that's one thing that brings people to us. And in a more general way, it's taking down some of the barriers as a way to get so many injectors to come to us, like medical directors, especially for RNs. It's a huge barrier for getting into aesthetics, especially if they don't want to go work in a med spa. There was a huge issue with even finding a job in a med spa. So that has shifted, it seems, where people are actually looking for injectors, but so many people require experience, as they should. But there's this circle of not being able to find it and not being able to get experience. And then, so it's a circle that we're trying to break as well. And then I already said the monetary value of what we give, the investment is so much lower than if you did it on your own. And, the legal part of it is a huge deal too. When you come under our umbrella in whatever way you do, you fall under our legal kind of umbrella. So she doesn't necessarily represent them. She represents us, but still it's very helpful once again, and a huge advantage because, you can spend $100,000 in 2 months on getting a med spa up and running. So those are some of the things I think why injectors come to us and then why they stay with us for sure. And now it's kind of shifted to, we don't really look anymore. I think word has kind of gotten out. And so now it's a continual kind of influx of nurses who are wanting to get into nurses, PAs, all levels, wanting to get into aesthetics, including physicians. So
no, it's definitely jumped in popularity, and you see it a lot more often. So I guess, my question next up is like, this happened so fast, but I'm sure it wasn't easy. So what's been the most challenging parts of, putting this all together so far?
Honestly, and this will sound weird to say, but staunching the growth has probably been the most challenging part. So I have to speak once again to the twin thing. I think having two brains that work very, very similarly has helped us. And then, our attorney is very similar to us too, which was just beautiful coincidence. But, the three of us putting our heads down and moving forward with this in such a way that we almost grew too fast. And so now the challenging part is, strategy and kind of staunching growth. And I say staunching, I don't mean stopping it. I just mean like controlling it, making sure we fall back on our inclusivity, convenience, and compliance is kind of our core values. Compliance being a huge one because compliance leads directly to safety. And so I guess now that's our biggest challenge. And then to answer in the beginning, our biggest challenge was really like work-life balance, right? Like I had a 2-year-old and a newborn, and just trying to, once we got our heads wrapped around what our idea was, when it moved from, my sister and I were just mobile Botox in February, that was the idea. When it grew over the next couple of months into what it is now, really, or at least the base idea, it was really just challenging to find the work-life balance for the large amount of work that had to go in it. The motivation was just really, we felt like we have a niche. Initially, it wasn't so much so, and now that some of the stuff that we do is a little more, like I said, proprietary, we have found a niche that we think we do it differently and with a higher quality, quite frankly, than some of the other things we found. And so, yes, so the challenge is now currently just, keeping it in line and making sure we don't let quality suffer anywhere.
Yeah. No, I like that.
Really
I like that. And that is something that you can see sometimes suffer when companies do grow too quickly, is all of a sudden the quality of their service goes down. And I've been on the other end of that, where I've been a part of a company that grew too quickly. I was one of their customers, and I stopped being a customer because they could no longer take care of me in the fashion to which I was accustomed. So
exactly.
And that's something that is a real concern, because you want to make sure that you're retaining the customers that you have. And that's something that I'm working on right now as a part of this podcast, is I want to make sure that when people listen, they're getting good, high quality content, and that it's not something where, hey, they listen for a little bit and then there's an episode that, I didn't think the quality of that one was great, and so I'm not going to tune in anymore. So making sure that even though you're growing responsibly. So I definitely appreciate that. But so where do you see all of this going in the next 5 years?
Gosh, that's obviously a very common question and in business, and it's hard to answer, as it is for a lot of people, but it's not so much that we're changing so quickly. It's just, once again, we are growing so quickly that I try to focus in a little bit more tightly. Like, where do I see us in 5 years? Sold maybe, or, less of a direct role in it. And, but the same thing continuing on, the same quality, the training program just blossoming into something bigger, more. And, we're on faculty for some conferences already, which is a very prestigious honor, and we're very excited about that. So just to continue to, bring down this barrier of getting into the aesthetic world, and hoping that Smiley can be the original, the OG kind of for doing this for people. It's not to say that people aren't going to come and copy what we're doing, but hopefully we've set a foundation of, here's a really good way to do it. The injectors that we put out are high quality. They're trained extremely well with very strict standards. And so I just want to see that maintained over the next 5 years. And then a little more short term, we have quite a few opportunities just this year that are very exciting, and like real estate and owning our own buildings and buildings and stuff that are Smiley. And I would love to see, and I'm trying to work closely with the AANA to get aesthetics recognized by the MBCRNA as well as AANA, but kind of hoping to start that relationship, as so many CRNAs get into aesthetics and stuff. And so I'd love to see that become part of our curriculum. That's kind of outside of Smiley, but I would love for Smiley to do that. But, it be even a class that's held in school, or, just something that we start including this in our practice, because we are really good entrepreneurs, A, as CRNAs, and then B, we're really good with needles. So that works really well with aesthetics. If you can poke a spine and poke a central line and do some of those very life-threatening things, then you can certainly put some Botox and filler in people's faces. So it's really it can be a married industry. So I want to see that. I see that growing, and I see that becoming something that CRNAs excel at, and we make a name for ourselves in aesthetics. I think it's neat. I didn't mean to cut you off there, but there are different specialties that are coming out now in anesthesia. And so it is something that I think about, the residencies that
physicians get into that are, more of those specialized residencies and or fellowships, if you will. And I can see some of those things happening within anesthesia for certain, I guess, career tracks. If you want to get into aesthetics, here's this one. If you want to get into, let's say, hospital administration, there's a track for that. Leadership, administration, all those kinds of things. So there are different tracks that I think are going to be coming along eventually. At least I hope so.
Yes, it would be. I think it'll just benefit the community as a whole because. I haven't talked to many CRNAs that necessarily want to give up anesthesia or anything like that, or even necessarily work less. It's just kind of a different option, a different outlet. I hate using the word side job or side hustle because that implies it's somehow lesser than, but just a different, thing to do in life that is quite happy, really. It's a very, especially post-COVID, it's a very happy industry to be in terms of, client outcome and stuff. So, yeah, would love to see a certification, maybe to what you're pointing, just tracks that we can specialize in that they're not taking away from anesthesia. They're just augmenting it and enhancing it.
Yeah.
So I would love, that's my hope for us as CRNAs for sure.
Cool. So what are some final pieces of advice that you have for anybody who's thinking about getting into the aesthetic space?
Sure. So I answer this question in a similar way when I'm asked it a lot because it's so daunting. It's so different than the technique of injecting. That's not different. We can, we start IV, we do all the things we do with some of the practices in aesthetics, but the idea of getting into aesthetics is daunting because, as my sister likes to say in our business class, we go to the hospital, we're trained as nurses, almost like a trade, and a little different with anesthesia, specialty trade, but we go to the hospital, we're given our patients, we treat them, and then we go home. And so there's just no, what we touched on earlier, there's no business, there's no, just learning some of this entrepreneurial stuff. And in my opinion, when you're speaking to CRNA specifically, anesthesia providers specifically, like our minds are primed and ready for stuff like that. I mean, the drive is there to get through anesthesia school. The type A, some of the stuff that you need, I think, to make great entrepreneurs. So, my piece of advice is it's daunting, but you can do it. Sometimes it's how did you do it is not necessarily the right question. It's not a bad question. It's just looking at what we've done is not a great measure to just getting into aesthetics in general. And so sometimes it's like just bring it back down to getting into aesthetics in general is not as daunting as it seems. There's a right way to do it. We all know the right way to do it. Don't cut corners, and it's patient safety first and those kind of things. And so when you look at it and you don't understand something, we have a community now, especially with anesthesia and the CRNAs, with a Facebook group that I started. It has, almost 4,000 people in it, and reaching out and finding a resource. Someone's out there to help. I, for one, Smiley Aesthetics is very big on we don't charge people for information. I don't charge people for emails. I don't do some of the other crazy stuff I've heard is out there. So, if you keep working at it and keep digging for information, you're going to find it, and getting started is within reach. So if it's something that's been a passion, which it is for so many people, then reach out and you can do it. Is basically, don't let it overwhelm you to the point that you don't try. Training is always a good first step too, investing in some training. And then at the very least, you'll know if you like doing it. So it's just about taking the first step, as with a lot of big things that feel different. Take the first step. So that's my biggest piece of advice. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know that you have piqued the interest of a lot of people who are listening to this, and I'm sure some of those people are going to want to reach out to you for more information. How can they get a hold of you?
Sure. So we have a general website at smileyaesthetics.com that's service-based, as well as we do have like a Become an Injector tab and speaks to some of our me and my two partners and our backgrounds. And then, I'm super open. My email is very simple. It's mary@smileyaesthetics.com. And I get messages and stuff all the time. I'm just here for all of it and answer as quickly as I can. And I'm happy to share, the first piece of how to get started. What do you need to do? The first steps and stuff, whether it's with us or without. That's the other thing, is I train people, hundreds of people a year, and it's not just Smiley. It's from all over, and they go back and do their own thing. And then we just remain a resource to them. So I want to be that for anybody, whether you come see me in person and train with us or not.
Yeah.
So, but we love training. I love training CRNAs.
Yeah.
Love hiring CRNAs. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, this has been incredibly insightful. I got to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This has been amazing. Appreciate what you're doing.
I appreciated how Mary really walked us through her path to where she is today, highlighting the choices that she had to make along that path. And it just goes to show you that there are a few different ways that you can get going with this side career. And of course, she and her team have seen the larger opportunity here, and that's allowed them to support other mobile injectors and expand their own business. I mean, in a relatively short period of time, she has already been able to bring around 100 fellow injectors under the Smiley Aesthetics umbrella. And while leading in this way isn't necessarily for every potential injector out there, I think it's pretty cool to know that that's an option from both the business owner and the injector sides. If you need that support as an injector, there are companies out there that will bring you under their wings. But I do want to highlight Mary's final piece of advice, which was perhaps the most important thing that separates those successful injectors from others. And that's to not cut corners and put patient safety first. And I know that goes without saying, but I just don't think you can go wrong if you keep those two things at the forefront of your mind. That's going to do it for the show. If you'd like to reach out to Mary, make sure you check out the show notes for her contact info and links. This is Bobby Jones signing off. Till next time, stay safe and take care of each other out there.
Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.